I met my ex-girlfriend Jennifer at some high school event when we were both 16. We started off as really good friends, which led to us dating in my senior year of high school while she was a junior. Fast forward 2 years later, she had decided to move to my state after transferring colleges. By this time, I had established a pretty strong social network and things were going really well for me. I was a bit of a loner during my high school year, so when I heard she was coming to town, I was super eager to show off how far I had come since then. After a few months of catching up and me flexing my social status on campus, our friendship was doing pretty well. She would keep hinting at stuff and saying things like she had never had sex before and that she wanted to lose her virginity to me, as well as she wanted to become exclusive and for us to move in together, along with all sorts of other stuff that made me think we were getting serious. We eventually ended up making it official, and a few days later, this random friend of mine who was on my basketball team pulled me aside one night at a dorm party and told me that he had heard the news about Jennifer and I making it official, and if I was sure I wanted to be in a relationship. At the time, I found it weird and thought that it was super left field since me and this guy only ever had small talk and him asking this was super random. I told him yes and then walked back over to Jennifer. I distinctly remember looking at her for a couple seconds and looking back to him as he nodded at me before walking off. I hadn't paid it too much attention, but I did think it was quite unusual at the time. Jennifer and I would talk about our past relationships and sexual history. She told me she was a virgin and had only kissed one guy. She would behave noticeably strange whenever we had these types of conversations. So, I eventually called her out on it and told her to spill the beans and come clean. She insisted that it was just the one guy, a guy she dated in college before we started talking. And me not knowing any better, I just left it at that. A month or two later, she started taunting me about her making out with some guy at her old college. I found it pretty funny at first and took it lightheartedly until I started to get annoyed at the fact she found things like this funny. I said to her, "I know you're joking because otherwise you would have told me by now. It's really weird you think this is funny." She then changed the subject. The alarm bells in my head immediately went off, and I started grilling her about spitting out the truth, although I had no idea what the truth was. I made the mistake of getting increasingly angry every time she tried to wiggle out of it, and after a certain point, she said she went on a date with some guy once when she and I were just friends, and that she only did it because she was trying to make me jealous at the time. I wouldn't have cared in any other situation, but I was already so pissed and worked up that I grilled her for not mentioning it to me. She apologized and we made up. The next day, she eventually admitted that she made out with the guy once on a date. Over the span of 2.5 days, I practically had to force the truth out of her, and her version of events had now gone from going on a date with a guy to making out with him a couple times after a few dates to practically doing everything but having sex over the course of 2 to 3 months. She swore up and down that nothing had happened, and we had a bunch of lengthy heart-to-heart conversations about mending things between us. One red flag I did notice was when she told me that she was so traumatized by everything that she deleted all the conversations with him, so she was unable to show me. Also, she would start hyperventilating whenever I brought up stuff from her past, and say she was getting scared of me getting mad at her, which basically forced me not to mention it. A few months down the line, while I was on a road trip with some buddies to play at a pickup basketball tournament, I'm at a coffee shop and I see the same guy that she had a thing with from her previous college. I recognized him from stalking his Facebook. While we were about 20 minutes from her old campus, it was still a bit random. And me, being a bit stoned, I decided it would be pretty funny to strike up a conversation and see the type of guy he was. As soon as Jennifer's name came up, and I mentioned that she and I were dating, I noticed his friends began chuckling. I asked what was so funny, and he just asked if she ever mentioned him. I said, yeah, she mentioned you guys went on a few dates. This led to his friends losing it, and him poorly attempting to hold in a grin. I asked if there was anything I should know about, but he said no, there wasn't. My teammates and I left and headed on our way. I spent the whole drive rationalizing it, while my friends were grilling me for ignoring his mate's behavior when we talked about Jennifer. We ended up playing in the basketball tournament the next morning, and I got along pretty well with another team of hoopers that we had a super close game with. After both our teams got eliminated, we were invited over to their spot, where we smoked and chatted for a bit. They mentioned a bunch of stories about the girls they'd hooked up with, and all the freaky shit they'd do with them. One of them ended up asking me about my girl, and I showed him a photo, after which all of his friends started laughing. I had been getting roasted by my friends about the coffee shop incident earlier, and was now tired of the situation, so I called them out straight away, asking them what the fuck was going on. He told me that he had seen her hooking up with different guys at a bunch of parties in her first year, and that she had built up a bit of a reputation with being easy to get with. I ended up leaving a while later, not knowing what to think, but all of this had me going fucking mental. I knew the coffee shop conversation and know this couldn't be a coincidence. I had gotten way too drunk and high and ended up calling her in the middle of the night, asking about what the fuck was going on. She denied everything, began crying, and begging me to stop asking her about it. At this point, the whole situation and her not showing me her conversations a few months ago just became too much, and I absolutely lost the plot. I started punching the door, and my teammates had to restrain me from not messing up our Airbnb. The next morning, I messaged the guy on Facebook and asked him to catch up. He wasn't keen at all, and I knew he felt super weird about it since I was practically a complete stranger to him. He agreed to meet up nearby while I was on my way back to college. He didn't want to come alone, which I understood, so he ended up calling his friends, who I wasn't too keen on seeing again. This one guy kept taking Snapchats and zooming up on my face from a distance, which just made the whole thing so much worse. This guy went on to confirm the stories I had heard from the night before while hanging out with the other guys, telling me he and Jennifer had been hooking up casually since her third week of college, and she had hooked up with most of the guys in their mutual classes. Though he wasn't sure, he mentioned he'd heard stories of her having threesomes at house parties and all sorts of nasty shit that I refused to believe. Nothing interesting really happened after this. I had a long drive home that I used to process things and talk the situation out with my teammates. I pulled up to her place and started asking her about all of the stories I heard and whether or not they were true. Surprisingly, she denied every single one of them before faking another panic attack, at which point I decided to leave. I eventually got her friends to pick up her stuff from my place, and I started applying to other colleges to do an exchange semester abroad, and ended up transferring to another college with better facilities for my last 2 years. Apparently, she coupled up with a super nice guy who has no idea about her past, and my friends know for a fact she's cheating on him also. He bought her a car for her birthday a few months ago, and they're apparently thinking of moving abroad together once things open up again.